Hi, welcome back. I'm Zoe Sullivan, your host for Talkback for Teens, and this is Sally. So, how do you guys get people interested in reading books and reading newspapers when so many teenagers today are like, no, I don't read, reading's stupid?
I think because for us, Canvas is written by teens, kind of for teens, so that's very interesting as well. Not only are the people that wrote in them buying them and then reading the rest of the book, not just their poems, but also other people that are interested in submitting will buy the books to submit to later, and then they'll tell their friends about it. And it's kind of, I think as a teen, it's really cool to read stuff, really great stuff by other teenagers, as opposed to kind of slightly pretentious adults, that are trying to cram their ideas down my throat.
Right.
Well, and I think it makes it even better that it's completely produced and edited and managed by teens, because I know that I'm always more acclimated to read something if it's like, oh yes, and it's run entirely by teens, or oh, we have some teen editors, because there are a lot of newspapers and magazines out there that say, oh, we're teen run, and then they're really managed by the adults. Whereas I think with Canvas, we're really able to step out, and we have advisors, but they really sit back and let us do all of the driving pretty much, unless we encounter a huge problem or we have some kind of technical issue or there's like a legal question involved. And I think that really helps draw in the teen community.
And with your Victor newspaper, do a lot of people read that?
We try to feature a lot of students and teachers, so that really helps, because if we feature a sports, an athlete, they're going to be like telling their friends like, read this, so they'll also see the other issues in the paper. And we also did one article about an English teacher and about his football days, and a lot of people thought that was cool, and they were telling everyone, they're like, you got to read this article and how cool he was and how he's playing football. So when we feature students and teachers, that gets the word around.
Do you use any social media to get the word around too?
Yeah, we actually have a Twitter. It's the Victor Voice, and we always tweet when the newest issue is coming out, or any story ideas, any interesting topics students want to see being written about.
So is that effective? A lot of people get their information from you guys off of social media?
Yeah, we some of the jokesters in the class will think of witty things to say to foreshadow the newspaper, and that really helps because everyone's on Twitter these days. So.
Right. Tell me a little bit about revising things. What's the difficulty in that?
Oh boy, revising. It's like a double-edged sword to me, because on the one hand, I know that it's good for revising, especially for editing, like peer editing, when I get either other members of the team or when I get the editors to look at my paper. I know that it's good for them to look at my paper, because it's almost like a pseudo narcissism when I'm reading it, like, oh yeah, this is good, and I'll overlook things that they can catch. But on the other hand, when I read, when they say, or when they tell me, you really got to change this, I'm like, no, I really don't want to. And it really hurts, but it's definitely a helpful thing. It helps increase the efficiency of my pieces.
This is really good, and you think it's great, and then you get it back, and just half of it is all marked up, and then you really, you sit there, and you have to think, you're like, how do I make this better? Because you know it's not good, and it just takes a lot of thought to fix it up.
With Canvas, we don't really have a lot of, there's an editor's note that goes in the forward that is written by one of us that has to get edited. And that's really the only thing that we work with revision on, where we will talk actively with the person who's going to change it, because all the work that we publish, we just edit and then publish it, so we don't actually work with the writers on revising it. But for that, I'm not very good at sugarcoating things, so rather than just pointing out where I think things need to be changed, I'll try to offer suggestions. Like, I'll say, I love how you highlighted the pieces here. Maybe we could put the names in, or maybe you could pick other themes to work on as well. So I try not to just say change, and I try to offer things that can be stuck in there to maybe make it a little easier, or to spark a new idea that they can work off of as well.
I would say the same thing for the editing and revising also applies to us when we lay out pages for our paper, because we lay them out ourselves. So you get, even if it isn't your story that you're laying out, you get really into laying out your page, creating this intricate design, and you're all, oh, I'm gonna I'm going to make this look ergonomic and classy, or I'm going to make this avant-garde and different. And when you get it back and the editors have completely rearranged it, you get that feeling where you're like, what have you done to my baby? But it's a good thing, because as much as we have the best thoughts in mind for what we create, sometimes it's good to have another voice telling you, maybe you shouldn't do that.
Yeah, because otherwise in your head you're a little biased for yourself. You're like, oh, I'm awesome. And other people are like, well, these things could be worked out. And I think it's good to have those second or third or even fourth pair of eyes to look things over.
It's almost like borderline egomania is where it gets to, when you don't have that person looking over your shoulder in a way and saying, that's not the best idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, with journalism, sometimes it's really hard when you get a story, you want to write about multiple things, but you have to focus on one angle. So it's frustrating if there's some things that you want to touch upon, but they really don't make sense for your story, so you have to figure out how to just leave that out.
Mm-hmm. What are some of your favorite pieces that you have read? Both in the newspaper or creative writing, anything.
Favorite authors, favorite poem.
I would say that my favorite author, that's kind of hard to choose. It's like choosing a favorite food or a favorite movie. But I would say my favorite author, or at least the author that impacted me the most in life, was George Orwell. Because after I read 1984, that changed my life. That changed the way I look at society, the way I look at people, and the way I look at writing. Because I feel as though if we as writers don't do what we do, then people higher up in positions of power in the world will be able to turn the world into what it was like in 1984. And I for one, don't want that to happen. So that was definitely, it was a motivator for me. It was an eye-opener. And it's just it's a good book to read. It's well written. It's very easy to read. It's not very, the prose is very easy to read, layman's terms kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. My favorite author will change a lot. Like right now it's Andrew Smith, just because I'm reading a lot of his work. But I do have one favorite author that will probably never change, and that would be Lewis Carroll. And he's just like my person to stand by. And I think it's probably because some of his writing is just so out there. Like, he's going to make up his own words and he's going to do his own thing, and he doesn't really seem to care what people think. And I've always admired that, because I don't really think you should try and fit into whatever writing trend is going on, if there is a writing trend, or if people are like, well, I think your writing is a little too dark or a little too, it's you. So I don't think you should try and change it. And I think that Lewis Carroll really embodied that for me, and his stories just had a lot of life and color and strangeness that made them just really fit into what I needed.
Mm-hmm.
My favorite author is Terry Pratchett, and I read actually the main thing he has written is the Discworld series, which is absolutely massive. And so I guess I'd say just by quantity alone, like I have a hard time saying what my favorite book is, and it may or may not be one of his, but he's written so many of my favorite books, I have a hard time saying otherwise. And then also I really admire his approach to writing fantasy and how he just kind of conceives of fantasy. Like, sometimes you get the sense that fantasy is a celebration of what's beautiful in the sense it's sort of like pristine and untouchable, and it's almost elevated above mundane things. But then sometimes, on the other hand, you get the converse of that, where everything's dark and gritty, which there's nothing wrong with that, but at the same time, it both end up being sort of humorless, whereas I really admire him for highlighting just how silly and messy and interesting everything is, and that sort of thing.
Anyone else have some favorite authors, pieces?
My favorite author is the German author Thomas Mann. And my favorite book by him is called A Death in Venice, because I love the character development. Basically, it's about an old man who moves to Venice, who goes on a vacation to Venice, and he meets this beautiful Polish boy who's 13, and he starts to slowly fall in love with this boy based on his appearance. And he'll often look at himself in the mirror and wonder why he can't be beautiful like this boy, and sort of try and make himself more beautiful to impress this little Polish boy. And well, of course he dies at the end. That's not really a spoiler, because it's called A Death in Venice. But the way that he goes from being sort of proud and arrogant to the end, where he's just kind of broken, I guess, by this boy and the beauty of life and youth and how he slowly lost that.
Mm-hmm. So we said earlier that social media helps get your writing across and get your newspaper articles across, but how could it break the form of writing and maybe like bring attention to the social media instead of reading a book?
With journalism, it's rough because you always want to, unless you're in that kind of journalist who works for, nothing against them, but who works for these kinds of publications, you usually want to stay away from fluff pieces that don't have any substance. And sometimes with social media, it's a bit hard to stay away from that because people do like to know, some people, about problems, or they like intricately crafted stories. But you are going to have some people who just like the very simple aspects of it, the humor, or the people that they want to know that their favorite celebrity just got a haircut, that kind of thing. And it's hard to differentiate between that and something that's important or relevant.
Yeah, it can really turn into like a clickbait war. Like who has the catchier tagline, or who has the cuter picture, or, they have a celebrity to back them up, or it's an adorable animal, or it's a very small child and they're doing something amazing. And so sometimes it can be hard to compete because you want to be honest and you want to promote your work. You don't want to lie about it, but at the same time you want to get the attention that is so often taken by more grander things, or things that are said to be more grand even if they're not.
So how do you get people's attention to, other than social media, of course, to read these books and read these newspapers and not focus so much on all the fluff?
Leads and headlines, those are very important to write. Those need to be good quality, but as long as you're honest, I think people will read what you have and take it at face value. And hopefully, at least with my pieces, when they walk away, they go, okay, I've learned something new, or, oh, that was funny, I had a good laugh. And you have to accept the fact that some people just aren't going to read your piece. And you also have to accept the fact that some people may even dislike your piece and go, that guy's a jerk. He's not a good writer, or he doesn't know what he's talking about. You just have to accept that.
Mm-hmm. With journalism, one of the biggest things is you have to have really eye-catching pictures, because if someone sees a picture that's cool or interesting, they're going to start reading the caption, and maybe they'll be hooked, and then they'll start reading your whole article. I mean, even when I'm going through newspapers and I'm trying to find something, if I see a cool picture, I'll start reading the article.
Mm-hmm. What are some hardships that you have faced, both personally or just in a whole group with writing?
I would say that it was pretty hard for the people who worked on the Tyler story. Remember that? That was definitely emotional to write about. A student, Tyler, who died at our school. And for the people who were working on that, a lot of them who worked on it were personal friends of his. And it was very hard for them to write that in an emotional sense. And even though I myself didn't know Tyler personally, when I read the article, I could kind of feel the pain that was put into that from his loss. And when I read that, I was shocked. I was like, wow, it was very moving. It was very deep. And that would be probably one of the biggest hardships, I think, that I've seen so far in writing. But other hardships are just things that are, in comparison to that, are kind of silly, like, oh, they didn't like the way I laid out my page, or, oh, they didn't like this word choice. But compared to the actual pain and sweat and blood and tears that you put into some stories, that's nothing,
Mm-hmm. James's story, like Tyler's story, it was hard to come up with what, headline or story we could use in our next issue, like what could follow that.
Mm-hmm.
We couldn't, use another depressing story. We had to we had to find something else to keep our readers interested and not push it aside, but we had to, move forward.
Is a story that's really emotional and hard to make better than some piece about what's going on in the school?
Yeah, I think those kind of pieces, I mean, they're real, and I mean, there's so much emotion that you can't get from just like other stories. So they really people can connect with that.
Like recently, the latest issue of our paper, I printed an article that I had interviewed Courtney Wagner and her mom and her sister, and she talked to me all about her journey with glioblastoma and the whole hashtag Get Courtney to Ellen, and when she got to Ellen and how amazing that was, and it was just so inspirational to really learn her story. And being able to write that, I just hope that so many other people that read it would be inspired by what she did.
Mm-hmm. What are some dangers that come from writing?
With great power comes great responsibility type of deal. Mm-hmm. It's really words and writing and even things like stories and poetry and music, they're really the most powerful weapons you can think of because they're very lasting. They leave a lasting impact on people. So you have to know how to use that weapon. You have to use it responsibly. Sometimes you have to use it as a weapon. Sometimes you use it as a way to communicate with others. So it's very important the way you select what you talk about, who you communicate to, because it can be a very powerful thing. It can affect someone's life, just reading a story.
And I think it can be dangerous and very easy for writers to fall into writing just stereotypical things or the same story that has been written before. So I think you just have to, and it can be difficult, but you have to go out and you have to read things that maybe you won't want to read just so you can expand your knowledge and you can learn new things, so you can write different, you can write better, you can write what hasn't been written before. I mean, in reality, a lot of people are writing and they're writing about a lot of things, so it's a debate whether anything is truly original or not, but you can always try and try and try to be pushing the envelope with your own writing and encourage other people to do the same.
Pens are dangerous. You can poke your eye out with one. If you keep them in your pocket, you can jab yourself in the leg. But on a more serious note, people don't really like to have their ideas challenged, I guess I'd say, overall. And writing carries some inherent risks in that regard, in that there'd be far less argument in the world if no one ever said anything, if everyone just stepped in line with whatever the most authoritative person nearby is saying. But at the same time, that would be, in a way, meaningless because there'd be no way to develop or advance one's own intellectual ideas, that sort of thing. So I guess there's always going to be an inherent conflict there with writing.
If I could go back to what Cheyenne was saying earlier about original ideas, I might say that there aren't really any original ideas, but it's the perspective that you put on it that makes the idea original. And I think one of the dangers of writing is to write to like impress people and not use your own perspective or like try to understand other people's perspectives. To lose that honesty, I guess, is dangerous.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, for coming and talking about all of your writing ventures. I'm Zoe Sullivan from Talkback for Teens. That's Talkback for Teens with a 4. Check out our Instagram and our Twitter and our Facebook, all of them Talkback for Teens. And be sure to check out our website with loads of articles and videos like interviews just like this. And if you want to get involved, get involved. We can be a writer, you can be on the show, you can be behind the scenes, whatever you want. So thank you for watching. Check back soon for another episode.
Tonight will become